Funk, the house help, went to the market to buy vegetables with the sons of the widowed businessman, and Chinedu was surprised when he saw Funke controlling the chaos with a shopping bag on one arm and her other hand guiding the boys between the stalls. Dio tried to grab the tomatoes before knocking over the basket. Emeka clung to the handle of the bag, his eyes fixed on his father. And Funke managed the scene with a low, firm voice. "Now you two stay here, very close to me." Chinedu stopped behind them, swallowed hard, and realized too late that his sons obeyed her in a way he could no longer command. "Funk, why are they like this with you?" Funk didn't answer right away. First, she pressed the paper bag against her body so the loaf of agege bread wouldn't slip out. Then she pulled Emeka a little closer to her leg with a short touch on his shoulder. Dio's hand remained in the air, caught between the desire to choose and the fear of making a mistake. Chinedu remained standing behind them, waiting for an answer he wanted to hear on his own terms, but the market didn't pause for anyone's anxiety. People pushed through the narrow aisle, a wheelbarrow squeaked past, a woman complained about the price of yams, and Funke needed to keep both boys at the same pace, so neither would get lost among the stalls. She took a deep breath, turned only her face towards Chinedu, and spoke softly, not provoking, but not backing down either. "They are like this with me because I don't let them feel alone for even a minute." Dio slowly lowered his hand, looked at his father, and tried to guess if a scolding was coming. Chinedu didn't shout, but his gaze hardened. His surprise had turned into something more difficult, a mixture of shame and a need for control. "I didn't tell you to bring them." Funke turned back to the vegetables and began to choose with a controlled haste, her hand going straight to the good ones without rummaging through everything. Her other hand held the reusable bag by the handle, so Emeka wouldn't pull on it hard and knock it over. "Did you ask me to go to the market?" "I came to the market. They came because they asked me to, and because they were cooped up in the house, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it." Chinedu took a step closer and stopped. Still keeping his distance, his voice came out quieter than he intended. "Are you challenging me in public?" Funke replied without raising her head. "I'm protecting them, and if that offends you, the market isn't the problem." Dio swallowed and spoke, not wanting to get involved, but his need came out before his prudence. "Daddy, I just wanted to pick the tomatoes. She let me. I did it right." Funke lightly touched his wrist, a signal to be calm, and continued. "Dio, you don't need to convince anyone." Emeka tightened his grip on the handle and whispered, his voice thin and trembling, "We don't want any trouble." Chinedu heard him, and that simple plea stirred something in him, because he knew it wasn't a random phrase. He breathed, looked around, and saw two market vendors observing from the side, not staring, but attentive, and a woman further down looking directly, curious. Chinedu didn't want to become gossip, but he also didn't want to lose what he thought was his authority. He tried to pull Funke into a private conversation, without touching her, just calling her name firmly. "Funke, come here." Funke didn't move, only answering in the same, even more controlled tone. "I am here." Chinedu clenched his jaw and his voice came out carefully, as if he were treading on something fragile. "I don't understand why they look at you like that. They don't even look at me that way." Funke picked up a bunch of scent leaves, checked it quickly, put it in the reusable bag, and then turned her body just enough to stand between Chinedu and the boys without touching him, but occupying the space, and answered with clarity, "Because with you, they never know if they can speak, if they can ask questions, if they can make a mistake. You don't realize it, but you punish the mistake before it happens. They come to you already afraid." Dio looked at the uneven dirt floor. His face turned red. He was hearing things he felt but didn't know how to say. Emeka stared at his father without blinking, waiting for his reaction. Chinedu tried to react with a justification. His voice came out faster. "I'm doing the best I can. I work. I provide. Funke cut him off, not aggressively, just firmly. "Providing isn't just about paying, Chinedu. It's about holding them when they're trembling. And when you're beside them, you're far away, even when you're close." The sentence left Chinedu speechless for a second. He glanced at Dio, saw the boy with his lip caught between his teeth, holding back tears, and it hit him hard in the chest because he hadn't gotten used to seeing his children cry since his wife died. He always tried to stop the crying with an order, with silence, with "it's okay now." He breathed and tried to return to what he thought was simpler. "Are you paying for this with your own money?" Funke closed her hand on the handle of the reusable bag and answered bluntly, "I've advanced it a few times, yes, because there needed to be food, because you forgot, because I wasn't going to look at an empty fridge and tell the two of them to wait for you to remember." Chinedu opened his mouth to deny it, and couldn't, because he remembered nights he'd come home late, his mind only on the office, asking someone to handle everything, and thinking that handling it was automatic. Dio slowly raised his face and looked at his father with a kind of disappointment that didn't need shouting. "You forgot to buy food?" Chinedu stiffened, looked around, felt the weight of being there, and answered quietly. It wasn't like that. Funke didn't let it become a lie, but she didn't humiliate him either. It was. A few times it was like that. And I'm not saying this to accuse you. I'm saying it because it has consequences. They feel it, they remember it, and then they explode over small things. Emeka squeezed his eyes shut, and his voice came out in a thread. I was hungry that day. Chinedu felt a tightness in his throat. He wanted to hug his boys, but he didn't know how to touch them without scaring them. He took another half step closer and stopped again. His whole body showed that he wanted a quick fix, but there was no quick fix here. Funke saw the impulse and said softly, "Don't touch them now, Chinedu. Let them breathe." Chinedu nodded almost without realizing it, and that nod was already a change. Dio noticed and looked at Funke, as if asking if it was safe. Funke lightly touched his head, a brief caress, and Dio breathed a little easier. Chinedu saw it, and his surprise returned with more force, because it wasn't just respect, it was a bond. It was trust. It was something he hadn't managed to build since the house turned into a place of grief and routine. He spoke in a restrained voice. "I didn't ask you to become this," Funke replied without softening it too much. "I also didn't ask for your house to become a place where children walk on tiptoes." The market aisle felt tighter. A crate of vegetables was pushed past. Someone shouted, "Make way!" Funke pulled the two boys further to the side, her body acting as a barrier. Dio held onto the hem of her wrapper. Emeka held onto the reusable bag. Chinedu was on the other side, and in that quick movement, Chinedu saw what he hadn't seen before. The boys clung to her automatically when something felt threatening. They didn't look to him, and that hurt more than any argument. He took a deep breath and tried to speak without attacking. "I saw you with them. I saw it just now. I didn't understand." Funke answered, "You didn't fail to understand. You were afraid of losing the place you think is yours." Chinedu opened his hand, closed it, and replied with an honesty he didn't usually show. "I am afraid." Dio quickly raised his face, his eyes welling up, and his voice came out soft. "We don't want to take you away." Funke looked at Dio with a firm, careful gaze. "Nobody is taking anyone away, but your father needs to learn how to be with you without ordering you around." Chinedu looked at Funke and said, "And you? You think you know more about my children than I do?" Funke wasn't offended. She answered directly, "I know what I see. I know what I live with them every day. I know what they do when you close the door. I know what they say in their room when they think no one is listening. And I know they need the real you, not just your presence in the house." Chinedu was silent for a few seconds. His eyes went to Dio's hands, small, with dirt from a tomato on them. And he remembered when the boy was smaller, when he still held his father's hand without fear, and he realized he had let go of that hand too soon. Funke turned to the stall again and began to finish her shopping, because she needed to maintain the routine and not let the conversation turn into a fight. And because standing there for too long also exposed the boys, she spoke to the vendor without changing her tone. "Ah, Oga, please weigh the tomatoes and the lettuce for me." The vendor, a man with a tired face and an observant gaze, gave a short nod and started weighing without getting involved. Chinedu stood to the side, trying to hold himself together. Dio pointed to a firmer tomato and said softly to Funke, "This one is good, right?" Funke nodded. "It is, but hold it gently. Don't squeeze." Dio picked it up with both hands, placed it carefully in the bag, and looked at his father, waiting for approval. Chinedu felt it and, for the first time in a long time, chose a response that wasn't a demand. "Good one, my son." Dio blinked quickly. His face relaxed a little. Emeka looked at his father with surprise, and Funke noticed the immediate effect. She continued what she was doing, but she stored that moment away, because any small thing, there was a big thing. Chinedu looked at Funke and said more quietly, "I didn't know that you could make them so calm." Funke answered without vanity, "I don't perform miracles, I just don't make them afraid." Chinedu looked away and spoke, still softly, "I never wanted to make them afraid," Funke replied. "But you did, and you still do. When you speak loudly, when you call it a mess, when they are just being children, when you tell them to shut up because you're tired, and when you disappear into meetings to avoid their difficult questions." Chinedu felt the blow because it was true, and the truth there had no metaphor, no embellishment. It was direct. He tried to maintain control. "Are you calling me a bad father?" Funky looked him in the eyes and answered with precision, "I'm saying you're lost and your children are paying the price." The vendor stated the price. Funky went to open her purse. Chinedu stopped her gesture with his voice. "I'll pay." Funke hesitated a second, and then nodded. Not out of submission, but because it was important for the boys to see their father take charge. Chinedu quickly took the money from his pocket, paid, and put the change away without looking at it. He held the bag for a moment, as if holding groceries was a concrete way to participate. Dayo followed the movement and asked, his heart tight, "Are you going to carry it home with us?" Chinedu answered before thinking too much, "I am." Emeka clutched the handle of the reusable bag and asked timidly, "Are you going to stay with us today?" Chinedu swallowed hard because he wasn't sure he knew how to stay, but he answered honestly, without promising the impossible. "I'll try to stay. I'll try to do it the right way." Funke looked at him and said softly, so it wouldn't become a speech, "Then don't try with force. Try with presence." Chinedu nodded again. His shoulders dropped a little, and his body seemed less ready for a fight. Funke adjusted the bags, put the bread more securely in the paper bag, checked that the vegetables were okay, and said to the boys, "Now we're going to leave here calmly, without running, right by my side." Dayo answered quickly, "Okay." Emeka repeated, "Okay." Chinedu stayed behind, trying to fit in without dominating, and that effort alone made him tense, because he had never learned to just be without being in control. They started walking down the same market aisle, stalls on one side, people on the other, the ground uneven. Funke was in front, Dayo by the stalls, Emeka on the inside holding the reusable bag, Chinedu right behind. And with each step, Funke gave short instructions. It wasn't to command, it was to organize. "Dayo, look ahead. Watch out for that crate, Emeka. Don't pull the handle, Chinedu. Stay more to the side so no one bumps into them." Chinedu heard his own name in that tone, without mockery, and he obeyed. He positioned himself more to the side and realized Funke wasn't trying to boss him around. She was preventing someone from bumping into the boys, and that also hurt, because it was obvious, and he hadn't seen it before. Dayo breathed easier, but he was still tense, and he said softly to Funke, almost whispering, "He's not going to get angry." Funke replied without looking back, "I'm here, and he's trying." Chinedu heard and felt the shame, because his son needed someone to guarantee that his own father wouldn't cause harm, and Chinedu didn't want to be that kind of father. They stopped for a moment to let a wheelbarrow pass. Emeka stayed glued to Funke. Chinedu stood to the side with the bags, and in that second of pause, Chinedu noticed the detail he hadn't seen when he was just at home. The boys were clean, dressed, fed, and that wasn't magic. It was work, it was attention, it was someone waking up early, making snacks, checking clothes, guiding their lives. And he had outsourced all of it to Funke without facing what was happening. He spoke more quietly, almost to himself, but Funke heard. "I thought I was handling it," Funke replied without cruelty. "You were surviving. They need to be living." Chinedu remained silent, and that was another change, because he always argued, always wanted to win the conversation. Here, he had nothing to win, he just had to accept. Dayo looked at his father again and asked, still suspicious, "Are you going back to the office today?" Chinedu replied, "No." Then Dayo insisted, not accusing, just wanting certainty. "But you will go later?" Chinedu looked at his son and decided not to lie. "I have things to sort out, but I can sort them out later. I need to sort you two out first." Funke turned her head to the side, analyzing if they were just nice words or a real intention. Chinedu noticed her gaze and added more directly, "I'm serious." Emeka let out a slow breath, and for the first time, his body relaxed a little. He let go of the handle with one hand and held it with the other, less rigid. Funke saw and kept walking. The movement had to continue because the rhythm was what held the boys' emotions together. She stopped near another crate to adjust the reusable bag on Emeka's shoulder. The handle had slipped. She lifted it carefully and said, "There, so it doesn't hurt." Emeka looked at her and said in a small voice, "Thank you." Chinedu heard, and his chest tightened. He moved a little closer, still not touching, and said to Emeka, "I can hold it for a bit, if you want." Emeka looked first at Funke, asking for permission with his eyes. Funke gave a slight nod, and only then did Emeka slowly hand the handle to his father. Chinedu took it carefully, held the reusable bag with both hands for a few seconds to get a firm grip, and then held it with one hand, trying not to make the boy feel insecure. Dio watched and let out, not with irony, but with a fear of being disappointed. Are you really going to hold it? Chinedu replied, I am. Dio looked away, trying to hide that it had affected him. Funke continued walking and said softly to Chinedu, so the boys wouldn't hear everything, don't promise what you can't deliver, Chinedu. They're already tired of promises. Chinedu replied in an even lower voice, I know. The market bustled around them, and their scene began to look more ordinary to outsiders. A woman with bags and 2 children, a man accompanying them. But on the inside, every second was delicate, because the boys were testing their father, and the father was testing his own ability not to ruin it. They arrived near the original stall again as the aisle curved and the flow of people turned back. Funke stopped to check if she had forgotten anything. She looked at the paper bag and the reusable bag, went over her mental list, and at that moment, Dio took a wrong step and nearly stumbled into a basket of carrots. Funke quickly grabbed his forearm, firm but not hurtful, and said, Stop, Dio. Watch where you're stepping. Dio froze and obeyed instantly. Chinedu saw the boy's reflex obedience without fear, and it showed him the scale of the problem. Because his son obeyed Funke with respect and obeyed him with fear, Chinedu took a deep breath and said, Dio, come, but move to the side slowly. Dio looked at his father, analyzed his tone, and moved without shrinking. This was new. This was small and giant at the same time. Emeka let out a short sound, a nervous laugh that almost turned into a sob. Funke placed her hand on the top of his head, a quick gesture, and said, It's all right. Nobody fell. Chinedu looked at Emeka and took a risk. Are you okay? Emeka answered with direct sincerity. I am, but I get nervous when you talk loudly. Chinedu felt the blow. He had no escape. He looked at Funke and saw that she wasn't using the boys. She wasn't manipulating. It was the boy speaking his reality. Chinedu lowered his head slightly and replied with a visible effort, I will speak quietly. Emeka nodded slowly, as if registering a new rule. Dio looked at Funke and then at his father, and his voice came out firmer. I get nervous too. Chinedu wanted to justify himself but held back. He simply replied, I've heard you. Funke didn't interfere. She just continued to maintain order because she knew their emotions could turn into a storm if no one held the line. She said to both of them, Now we're going to finish up here and go, without arguing in the middle of the market. Dio nodded. Emeka nodded. Chinedu nodded. And again, Chinedu obeying without irony was something the boys still didn't know how to interpret. They continued walking, the movement slow, Chinedu holding the reusable bag, Funke with the paper bag and another bag, Dio on one side, Emeka on the other. And it was at that point that the most painful thing happened. Dio tripped on a raised stone. His body lurched forward. Funke caught him quickly. Her hand cupped his forearm with the certainty of someone who had done it many times. Dio steadied himself, breathed heavily, and out of the shock came a word that wasn't supposed to come out. It came from the most vulnerable place, without control, in a short, broken sound. Moo. Dio stopped mid-word. His face instantly flushed red. Shame came with it. His eyes filled with water. He tried to swallow the sob, but couldn't. His chest trembled, and he stood there looking at Funke, not knowing what to do after saying that. Emeka's eyes widened, and he froze. Chinedu stopped dead. The reusable bag felt as heavy as a rock in his hand. Funke didn't pull away, because if she retreated at that moment, she would push Dio into an emotional abyss. She held his forearm firmly, brought her face a little closer, and said softly, just for him to hear, breathe, I'm here, you did nothing wrong. Dio started to cry, but silently, trying to hold it in, trying not to draw attention. Chinedu heard the incomplete word and felt the ground shift beneath him. His first reaction was pain, his second was anger at himself, his third was fear of losing his children, and he felt the urge to tell everyone to shut up. But he couldn't do that here, because if he shouted, he would confirm everything Funke had said. He swallowed hard, his eyes burning. He instinctively turned his face to the side so no one would see. But Funke saw, and the boys saw. And that also changed things, because Chinedu rarely showed anything that wasn't command. Emeka whispered, terrified. He didn't mean it, Funke replied to Emeka, quickly, firmly, to cut through the fear. I know he didn't, and it's okay. Chinedu turned his face back. His expression was exposed. He crouched down a little without touching and said to Dio, his voice low and cracking, I'm not going to be angry with you for this. Dio looked at his father, with a mix of anger and pain. His voice trembled. Then stop pretending it's not happening. Chinedu opened his mouth and closed it. He had no defense. He looked at Funke and said with shame, "I heard him. I heard." Funke replied without attacking. "You heard the loss, Chinedu. You didn't hear a betrayal." Chinedu took a sharp breath. He held back his tears the way he knew how, with rigidity. But even rigid, he wasn't cold. He was breaking inside. Dio wiped his face with the back of his hand, still crying, and spoke without a filter, because a child has no strategy. "I miss her. I miss you too. But you don't let us talk about her. You send us to our room." Chinedu closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, his gaze was different, more tired, more human. He said quietly, "I didn't know how. I didn't know how to listen without falling apart." Funke held Dio by the forearm and said, "Then learn now." Here, in front of them, Emeka tugged on Funke's wrapper and said quietly, "Can we go home?" Funke nodded. "Yes, we can. We're going. Just a little longer. Breathe." She started walking again, slowly, and the others followed. Chinedu held the reusable bag, as if holding it was holding on to the chance not to lose his sons. Dio walked with a red face, trying to regain control. Emeka watched his father the whole time, testing if the calm would last. Funke maintained order with short phrases. No speeches, just presence. "Watch the ground. Hold this. Don't run. Stay close." Chinedu was silent for what felt like a long time. And on that short walk through the market, the silence was full of things. It was full of memories. It was full of guilt. He looked at Funke and asked without accusation, with a kind of need, "Do they talk about her with you?" Funke answered without hesitation, "They do." Chinedu asked again, his voice trembling slightly, "Do they ask about her?" Funke replied, "They do." Chinedu's chest tightened, and he asked even more quietly, "And you answer?" Funke looked ahead and replied, "I answer what I can. I don't make things up. I don't hide it. I speak carefully. I tell them the truth they can handle." Chinedu felt a kind of relief and anger at the same time. Relief because his boys weren't alone. Anger because he, their father, had left this in the hands of someone else. Dio heard and spoke without looking at his father. "She talks about her without getting angry." Chinedu replied in a low voice. "I was angry at the pain, not at you," Dio retorted, still trembling. "But we were the ones who got hit by your anger anyway." Chinedu swallowed and said firmly, without shouting, "I understand." Funke glanced quickly at Chinedu and noticed he was trying to accept it, but something was still stuck. The man still needed to control something to avoid crumbling. Chinedu then spoke directly, without beating around the bush, in a tone that was both a plea and a confession. "I want to learn how to do this. I want them to trust me again." Funke answered with sincerity, "Then stop competing with them. Stop competing with me. You're not in a competition for affection. You're trying to reclaim your presence." Chinedu nodded, and Dio glanced quickly at his father, as if that word presence had lit something up. They stopped again because the aisle narrowed with a group of people. Funke pulled the boys close to her. Chinedu did the same with the reusable bag. And there, squeezed between the stall and the people, Chinedu stood next to Dio, so close their arms almost touched. Dio froze. His body still didn't trust. Funke noticed and said softly, "Just to Chinedu, don't force it." Chinedu replied with a minimal nod and moved away a little, respecting the boundary. Dio breathed, and that respect also became a small sign, but a sign nonetheless. They started walking again, and Chinedu found the courage to say something he had been avoiding since his wife's death, something he always pushed for later. "I don't know how to be a father without her." Funke answered without romanticizing, "You'll have to learn, because your sons are not going to wait for you to feel ready." Chinedu looked at the boys, and the sentence hit him like the truth, because it was. Dio and Emeka weren't stopping their growing, their feeling, their needing, and Chinedu had used work as an excuse, as an escape. He breathed and said, "I need you to tell me what you do when they panic." Funke replied, "I name what they're feeling. I give them a simple rule. I stay close. I don't shout. I don't use threats. I don't make them feel guilty for feeling." Chinedu listened and remained silent, the kind of silence that absorbs, not the kind that commands silence. Dio said softly, almost to himself, "She stays." Chinedu looked at Dio and replied, "I will stay." Dio didn't answer, but he didn't move away. And that was already something. The market carried on. And in that same environment, without a change of scenery, their lives seemed to be starting a conversation that had been postponed for far too long. Funke stopped near a basket of oranges just to let a woman with a trolley pass. She didn't buy anything else, just organized the space. And at that moment, Chinedu saw that Funke held the shopping with a natural ease, but her hands were marked by work. He had never looked at that before. He always saw the uniform and saw a function. Now he saw effort. He asked in a quieter voice, "Are you tired?" Funke answered without drama. "I am," Chinedu insisted, without attacking. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Funk looked at him with a weariness that had dignity. "I told you in my own way. When I asked you to stay with them for half an hour, when I asked you not to leave the house without saying goodnight, when I asked you not to tell them to shut up at dinner, you heard, and you chose to ignore it." Chinedu swallowed and said, "I was trying not to feel," Funke replied, "and they were feeling for you, too." Emeka pulled on the hem of Funke's wrapper and asked, "What are we having for lunch?" Funke answered, bringing the focus back to the concrete to calm them. "Rice, stew, salad, and you're going to help me wash the lettuce." Emeka nodded and looked at his father carefully, as if asking if his father was going to ruin the scene. Chinedu answered Emeka quietly, "Can I help too?" Emeka's eyes widened, and Dayo looked quickly, suspicious. Dayo asked, "Do you know how to wash lettuce?" Chinedu answered with a sincerity that wasn't offended, "I'll learn." Funke looked at Chinedu and said, "Learning is doing it without turning it into a spectacle. You just do it." Chinedu nodded and held the reusable bag more firmly. They continued walking, and Funke noticed that the attention of some people had lessened. The scene of conflict had turned into a family scene, and that was good for the boys. Dayo still cried now and then, without realizing it, a small sob, but he was walking. Emeka was quieter but less rigid. Chinedu was holding the bags without complaining, and Funke was holding everyone's emotional line, not letting it unravel. Chinedu then spoke again, and now the question came with a different urgency, as if he were afraid of finding out too late. "What do they call you when I'm not around?" Funke answered without hesitation and without pride. "They call me Funke." Dayo pressed his lips together. The shame still throbbed. Chinedu looked at Dayo and asked, softly, "And when you said that word, who did you want to call?" Dayo froze, took a sharp breath, and the answer came out broken, but sincere. "I wanted to call someone who wouldn't disappear." Chinedu closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, he had tears in his eyes. He didn't try to hide them, because hiding them there would make things worse. He spoke in a voice that was both quiet and firm. "I won't disappear anymore." Funke cut in with a truth that hurt but was necessary. "Don't say that as a promise, say it as a decision. And a decision means action today, not tomorrow." Chinedu replied, "Then tell me what to do right now, here." Funke looked around, saw they were still in the middle of the aisle, and answered in a simple, practical way. "Now, you apologize to them without over-explaining. And then you hold each of their hands, if they let you. And if they don't, you accept it and just stay by their side." Chinedu took a deep breath, looked at Dayo first, bent down a little to be closer to his height, and spoke in a low voice. "Dayo, I'm sorry for making you feel afraid. I'm sorry for not listening. I'm sorry for leaving you hungry and for not noticing. I'm not going to ask you to forget. I'm just going to ask you to let me try." Dayo trembled, his face crumpled, and he cried for real now, with sound, and he tried to wipe his face with his sleeve, ashamed. Chinedu didn't touch him. He waited. Funke placed a hand on Dayo's shoulder for a second and said, "Breathe." Chinedu turned to Emeka, still bent down, and said, "Emeka, I'm sorry for speaking loudly. I'm sorry for scaring you. I want to learn how to be with you without making you afraid." Emeka looked at Funke. Funke nodded slightly, and Emeka then said softly, "I don't like it when you close the door." Chinedu answered, "I will leave the door open, and if I need to close it, I will tell you, and I will come back." Emeka breathed and said, "Okay." Dayo continued to cry, and Chinedu waited a bit longer. Funke said to Chinedu quietly, "Now, offer your hand. No rush." Chinedu slowly raised his hand to Dayo, palm open, not pulling. Dayo looked at the hand for a long time, hesitated, and then touched his fingertips to it as if testing, and then held on for real, tightly. Chinedu felt the small hand squeezing and held it gently, without crushing, without pulling. Emeka watched and held out his hand too. Chinedu took Emeka's hand with his other, and there, in the middle of the market, without music, without speeches, without a pretty scene, just with the noise of people buying and selling, Chinedu stood holding hands with his two sons, and Funke walked beside them, keeping the rhythm, because life didn't stop, and they didn't have time for drama, they had time for action. Dayo pulled his father a little closer to Funke and said, his face still wet, "You're not going to fight with her, are you?" Chinedu answered quickly, firmly. "No," Emeka added, Afraid again? You're not going to send her away? Chinedu froze, because there lay the heart of the matter. He had thought about it more than once. Sending her away was his way of regaining control, but if he did that, he would break his sons. He took a deep breath and answered honestly, I won't send her away out of anger. I won't do anything without thinking of you two. Funke looked at him and said softly, directly, don't use them as an excuse to avoid facing your pride, Chinedu. If you want to change, you'll have to accept that I was necessary when you were not. Chinedu lightly squeezed his son's hands, not to restrain them, but to keep himself present, and answered, I accept. Dio glanced quickly, as if he couldn't believe it. Emeka did too, and Funke observed, because words there still didn't mean much. He was the one who had to prove it. Chinedu then said something that took Funke by surprise, because it wasn't typical of him to ask for help for real. Funke, I need you to guide me, but I don't want you to carry this alone. I want to share it. Funke replied cautiously. Sharing means being there when it's difficult, not just when it's convenient. Chinedu nodded. I know. They continued walking down the aisle, still inside the market, the same light, the same stalls, the same crates of vegetables, and the scene, to an onlooker, was simple. But on the inside, it was a huge shift. Chinedu felt the gaze of a woman who passed and smiled faintly at the sight of a father holding his children's hands. He ignored it, because this wasn't for the world, it was for his sons. Funke then decided she needed to establish a clear boundary, because their story couldn't be resolved in a market aisle, but it also couldn't be pushed back into the silence of their home without direction. She spoke softly to Chinedu as they walked. When we get home, you're not going to interrogate them right away. You'll give them time. You will eat with them at the table, with no phone, without getting up in the middle, and you will listen if they want to talk. Chinedu replied. I'll do it, Funke continued. And you will talk about her. If they bring her up, you won't shut it down. Chinedu swallowed hard, but answered, I'll do it. Dio squeezed his father's hand a little tighter, and his voice came out tiny. You promise? Funke looked at Dio quickly and said firmly, he's not going to promise, he's going to do it. Chinedu replied directly to his son, I'm going to do it. Dio nodded slowly, and that was the most trust he could give at that moment. Emeka looked at Funke and asked, Are you having lunch with us? Funke hesitated for a second, because she knew that lunch had to be for the father and his sons, but she also knew that pulling herself away suddenly could feel like abandonment to the boys. She answered with balance, I'll be nearby, but you will sit with your father. He's going to serve you today. Chinedu looked at Funke, and his voice was serious. I will serve them. Funke nodded and kept walking. The end of the market was closer, but they were still in the same environment, and Chinedu still had a question stuck in his throat since the beginning, the one that seemed to cut through everything. He looked at Funke from the side and said in a low, controlled voice, but loaded with urgency, Funke, I need you to tell me now, without avoiding it, why you know exactly what to do when they freeze up. Why do you recognize it so quickly? Why do you hold them like that? Funke clutched the paper bag, looked ahead for a second, and when she turned to him, her voice came out firm, but with real pain, no exaggeration. And she made it clear that this answer would change what came next. Because I've seen a house fall apart from silence before, and I won't let that happen to them. But there's something I've hidden from you since the day your wife died, and if I tell you, you will have to choose what to do with the truth. Chinedu waited, his hands still holding his sons carefully, and Funke realized that if she backed down now, everything would return to the usual silence. She pulled Dio and Emeka a little closer to her, without getting in anyone's way in the market, just adjusting the group so as not to block people passing, and spoke in a low, controlled tone without making a scene. I hid it because you couldn't hear anything that reminded you of her without turning to stone, and because I was afraid you would do something you couldn't take back. Dio squeezed his father's hand and asked with a choked voice, Is it about Mummy? Chinedu didn't answer immediately, but his body did. His shoulders tensed, his face hardened to keep from collapsing. Emeka looked at Funke with an anxiety he couldn't name, and Funke decided to be direct, because children understand what's direct and suffer from what's left hanging in the air. It's about your mother, yes. Chinedu let out a slow breath, and his voice came out quiet, with no command in it. Just say it, Funke. She shook her head firmly and corrected him as needed. I will say it, but you are going to stand here. You are going to breathe, and you are not going to take it out on them or on me. Chinedu nodded, and that nod seemed to hurt, as if he were accepting a loss of control to avoid losing his sons. Funke continued without preamble, looking at him and then at the boys, because the story was theirs too. The day she passed away, I wasn't just working in the house. I was with her. Before you came, from your room. I was the first person to hear it when she asked me not to let you two grow up afraid of feeling. Dayo let out a loud sob and tried to stifle it. Emeka started to tremble and squeezed his father's hand with all his might. Chinedu was paralyzed, and his voice was almost a whisper. You were with her? Funke replied, I was, and I saw you arrive. Then I saw you trying to be strong in your own way, and I saw you starting to erase everything that reminded you of her. Not because you didn't love her, but because you couldn't bear it. Chinedu closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, they were red. He tried to maintain his composure, but the mask didn't hold as well as before. What did she ask you? Funke gently passed a hand over Emeka's shoulder, just to ground him, and spoke with the same clarity. She asked me not to let you two become silent children. She asked me to take care of the basics when you got lost. And she asked one more thing that I've kept because you wouldn't let anyone touch the subject. Dayo lifted his wet face and asked with an anger born of pain, without being rude, what did you keep? Funke pulled the paper bag closer to her body, carefully opened the cloth tote bag she was carrying, took out a simple envelope, creased from being handled so many times, and held it between her fingers, as if it could fall and break. Chinedu looked at the envelope, and his throat seized up. His voice came out cracked. What is that? Funke answered without adding to the drama. It's a letter she left for you, and a small one for each of them. She asked me to give them to you when you could listen without telling the world to shut up. I waited, and I was wrong to wait so long. But I also saw what happened every time someone tried to bring it up. Chinedu reached for the envelope, his hand stopping midway, as if his skin feared the paper, and whispered, Why didn't you give it to me before? Funke didn't flinch. Because you were pushing your own sons away so you wouldn't fall apart, and I wasn't going to put more weight on them. I held what I could hold. Dayo pulled his father's hand forcefully, demanding his attention. Read it, Daddy, Emeka added in a thread of a voice. Read it now. Chinedu looked at the two of them, saw that their firmness was supported by Funke, and understood that this was the moment he had avoided for too long. He took the envelope carefully, like someone handling something with no second chances. Funke didn't put her bags down or move to dramatize the moment. She just stood there in the same market aisle, making sure no one got lost. Chinedu opened the envelope with trembling fingers, first taking out a larger sheet. He recognized the handwriting, and his face crumbled in silence. He tried to swallow but couldn't. Dayo and Emeka stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting for their father to choose what to do. And Chinedu chose to read it right there, because if he put it in his pocket, he might go back to disappearing. He scanned the lines and began in a broken voice, but he read, because reading was safer than inventing. Chinedu, if you're reading this, it's because the worst of the initial shock is over. I know you'll want to close the door and pretend it's not happening, but you can't. He stopped, clutched the paper, breathed, and Dayo said softly, urgently, Keep going. Chinedu continued, trying to keep his tone steady for the boys. I won't be there to pull you back when you go too far, so you will have to come back for them, for me, and for you. Let them say my name. Let them cry when they need to. Let them laugh without guilt. Emeka started to cry, quietly, without a sound. Dayo leaned his forehead against Funke's arm for a second, hiding his face. Funke didn't give a long hug, because she knew they needed to be with their father at that moment. But she kept her hand firm on the top of Dayo's back. Chinedu wiped his face quickly and continued reading, as if each sentence were pulling up a part of him that had been buried. I know you'll think that taking care of them means controlling them, but caring is staying, it's listening, it's saying sorry, it's admitting when you don't know, and it's letting your children make mistakes without fear. Dayo lifted his face and looked at his father, as if that sentence had been written for the moment he almost knocked over the basket of tomatoes. Chinedu read another part, and his voice failed completely, but he didn't stop. Funke will be there. Treat her with respect. Pay her what you owe her. Don't, clearing his throat, put on her shoulders what is yours. But also don't make her the enemy because she can do what you can't yet. She isn't stealing anything. She is holding things together while you learn. Chinedu stopped. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He lowered the paper a little and looked directly at Funke. His shame was exposed, defenseless. I owe you. Funke replied without gloating, without softening it. You do, and it's not just money. Chinedu nodded, returned to the letter, and finished the part that seemed to close a circle, as if his wife had foreseen what they were living through. If at any point you feel you've lost your sons, don't run to work. Run to them. Sit on the floor if you have to. Ask for forgiveness. Say my name with them, and stay, even when it hurts. Because they will remember what you do, Not what you command. Chinedu lowered the sheet and was unable to speak for a few seconds. The market continued. People passed, but it felt as if their aisle had stopped just for them. Dayo wiped his face with his sleeve and said with an anger born of sadness, "Did you hear that, Daddy? Did you hear?" Chinedu raised his gaze to his son, and the answer came without a ready-made excuse, without justification. "I heard, and I failed." Emeka squeezed his father's hand and asked, crying, "Are you going to leave again?" Chinedu squeezed both their hands, not to restrain, but to anchor, and answered with a voice that was firm for the first time. Not firm with command, but firm with decision. "I am going to stay." Funke then pointed to the envelope because there was more, and said softly, "There are their letters." Chinedu picked up the two smaller ones, his hand shaking. He looked at Funke as if asking for guidance with his eyes. Funke answered in the simple way the boys would understand. "Give it to them, no big speeches." Chinedu placed Dayo's letter in his hand. Dayo held it as if it was something that could disappear. Chinedu placed Emeka's in his hand. Emeka held it with both hands, pressed it to his chest, and looked at his father, afraid of tearing it. Chinedu said quietly, "Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it later?" Dayo answered quickly, unable to wait. "Read it." Emeka agreed. "Read it." Chinedu looked at Funke, and Funke nodded, and Chinedu opened Dayo's first. He read in a lower voice because it was intimate, but he read it there so it wouldn't become a secret again. "Dayo, you are strong, but you don't have to be hard. You don't need to protect your father from what you feel. Talk to me when you want. Talk to me out loud. And when your father gets lost, remind him that you are not a problem." Dayo broke down completely. It wasn't the sound of a scene. It was the cry of a child who had held too much in. He tried to hide his face but couldn't. Chinedu didn't touch him immediately. He remembered what Funke had said, and he waited for his son to allow it. And then Dayo threw himself forward, hugging his father tightly, as if his body had been asking for this for a long time. Chinedu carefully wrapped his arms around his son and said, his voice broken, into his ear, "I'm so sorry, my son." Funke turned her face for a second to give them privacy, but she stayed close because Emeka was trembling and needed solid ground. Chinedu slowly released Dayo and opened Emeka's letter. He read, trying to smile, but the smile was wet with tears. "Emeka, you have a big heart, and I know that sometimes you stay quiet so you won't be trouble. But you are not trouble. You are my son. You can ask to be held. You can ask for attention. You can ask for the shouting to stop, clearing his throat, and your father will learn to hear you." Emeka cried softly and held out his arms, unable to ask with words. Chinedu understood. He picked the boy up right there, careful not to bump into anyone, not moving from the spot, just lifting him a little. And Emeka rested his trembling face on his father's shoulder. Chinedu closed his eyes and held him, truly held him, and said with simple sincerity, "I'm here." Dayo was still crying, but now he was clinging to his father's leg. Funke watched and took a deeper breath, because for the first time, she wasn't holding this grief alone. Chinedu gently lowered Emeka, kept his hands on his shoulders, and looked at Funke with an open face, without the boss's posture. "You kept this all by yourself this whole time?" Funke replied, "I kept it, and I endured what I could, but I got tired too, Chinedu." Chinedu nodded, and his voice came out quiet, defenseless. "I made you carry it," Funke replied without aggression. "You did, and you made your sons carry it too." Chinedu looked at the boys and spoke directly, without trying to look good. "I won't make you carry it anymore." Dayo lifted his red face and asked suspiciously, demanding something concrete. "So what are you going to do today?" Chinedu breathed, looked around, saw they were still on the same market path, and chose decisions that fit the here and now, not a speech. "Today, I will walk with you to the end of the market. I will carry the bag without complaining. I will go home. I will have lunch with you at the table. I will let you talk about her. I will talk about her with you. And I will not get up in the middle of it to run away." Emeka looked up with fear and asked, "And the door?" Chinedu answered immediately, "The door to my study will stay open, and if I need to close it, I'll tell you, and I will come back. I won't use a door to disappear." Funke watched and decided to set a clear boundary, because the boys needed stability, and so did she. "And with me, Chinedu, what are you going to do?" Chinedu swallowed hard and replied, "I am going to pay you what I owe you. I am going to settle everything that is pending. I will respect you. I will not treat you as if you are invisible, and I will not put the responsibility of being their mother on you." Dayo glanced quickly at Funke, scared, as if this meant she was going to disappear. And Funke answered calmly, to prevent panic, "I'm not going to disappear. I'm just not going to replace anyone. I will continue to care for you, but your father is going to be a father. Emeka held onto the hem of Funke's wrapper and pleaded, crying, "You'll stay." Funke bent down a little, getting to his level without leaving the spot, and answered with a simple truth, "I will stay, if your father does his part. Because I also don't want to see you living in fear inside your own home anymore." Chinedu nodded and said, looking at the boys, not at Funke, "Because the promise was for them, I will do my part." Dio wiped his face and said, still harsh because his pain hadn't vanished, "Are you going to stop pretending everything is okay?" Chinedu replied, "I will stop. I will say when I'm not okay, and I will ask for help. I will not take it out on you." Funke saw that the moment was powerful but needed to be sustained by action. She picked up the paper bag from the ground, adjusted it on her arm, and said softly, firmly, returning to the concrete to prevent it from becoming just emotion without direction, "Then let's finish up here slowly, with the two of them by your side, Chinedu, and no rushing." They began to walk again down the same market aisle, stalls on either side, the baskets of vegetables still nearby, the ground uneven. And now Chinedu wasn't behind them like an inspector. He was beside them, holding a bag in one hand and Deo's hand in the other. Emeka walked on the other side, still leaning against his father now and then, testing if his body was still there. Funke walked with them, sustaining the routine, but no longer the only pillar. Dio looked at his father and let out a sentence he had been holding back for a long time, not as an attack, just as the truth. "I thought you didn't want us anymore." Chinedu stopped for a second, not blocking the aisle, just long enough to look his son in the eyes and reply with an honesty that had no easy way out. "I wanted you the whole time. I was just afraid I couldn't handle it, and I ran away in the worst possible way." Emeka asked quietly, "Are you afraid of Mummy?" Chinedu felt the blow, but answered, "I'm afraid of missing her, and I'm going to learn to feel it without making you pay." Funke watched the two boys breathing with more space, still hurt, but listening, and she knew the work was beginning here, not ending here. Chinedu then did something he never did. He asked Funke, not as an order, not as a demand, "Will you help me organize this? But the right way, with boundaries, with me involved." Funke answered without rushing, because it needed to feel safe. "I will, if you accept that I won't be your target when you're frustrated, and if you accept that your sons will have bad days, and you will stay anyway." Chinedu nodded, "I accept." Dio looked at Funke and asked, still afraid of losing what was safe, "Will she still come to the market with us?" Chinedu answered before Funke had to carry that one alone. "She will, if she wants to, and I will come too." Emeka looked at his father, his voice small. "Will you pick the things?" Chinedu replied, "I will pick them with you, and if I get it wrong, I won't shout. I'll try again." Funke kept walking, and Chinedu matched her pace, because now he understood that rhythm was also a form of care. They passed the same baskets of tomatoes, the same carrots, the same vendor who was pretending not to listen. And Chinedu looked at that man, and for the first time didn't feel superior. He felt like someone who was learning the basics in public. He made no speech, just returned his attention to his sons. Funke realized that the best way to secure the change was to take a practical, immediate step. She pointed to the bags and said, "Chinedu, put those down firmly and tell them what will happen when we arrive, without any embellishment." Chinedu breathed and spoke to the boys in short, sustainable sentences. "We get home, we wash our hands, we put away the groceries, we make lunch together, we eat together. Then we'll sit in the living room, and you can say whatever you want. I will listen, and if I get nervous, I will say I'm nervous. I will not shout." Deo stared at his father and asked with the hardness of someone afraid to believe, "And if you get up and leave?" Chinedu answered directly, "You can call me, and I will come back, and if I don't come back, you can knock on the door, and I will open it. I will not hide." Emeka let out a breath, a small relief, and leaned against his father again, as if that contact were proof. Funke saw, and for the first time that day, let her face soften a little, not a full smile, just an easing of tension. Chinedu noticed and said quietly to her, "I owe you an apology too," Funke replied. "Then apologize without making excuses." Chinedu paused for a second, looked at Funke, and spoke with the right measure of respect and shame. "Funke, I'm sorry for using you as a solution so I didn't have to face my own children. I'm sorry for letting you pay for things that were my responsibility, and I'm sorry for treating you as if you were just a function." Funke held his gaze and replied without seeking revenge but without letting him off too easily. "I accept, if you prove it, because I don't want pretty apologies. I want real change. Chinedu nodded, and that closed what needed to be closed there, without promising the world. They walked a few more steps in the same environment, and Chinedu squeezed Dayo's hand gently. Dayo squeezed back, still suspicious. But there, Emeka held his father's hand more firmly, and Chinedu looked at both of them, as if he were finally seeing their size, and the size of what he had postponed. He took a deep breath, looked at Funke, looked at the boys, and chose a sentence that left no loose ends, because it was a decision and a commitment, not a request for time, not an order, not an escape. Dayo and Emeka, from today, you can cry, say her name, laugh loudly, and make mistakes without fear, because I am going to stay here with you, and I will no longer ask for silence to hide what I feel.